Welcome to Startup Out of the Box, a regular podcast about startups with Marco Silva and Vitor Domingos.
On this episode number 18, we're going to talk about two things. Exactly, episode 18. We're going to talk about two things. The first one is an overview of a conference that we went last December. I know it's late, but it's going to be a brief review of the conference itself. And also afterwards, we did an interview with Professor Carsten Maple. He's a professor of systems engineering at the University of Warwick. At the Cybersecurity Center. We discussed with him IoT, security, cars, and a lot of interesting stuff that you can listen just in a moment. And the second thing is about also security in startups for 2019. Kind of predictions, roundup of what we
overview.
Think. Exactly. So what we think it's going to happen this year around startups for 2019. So let's go straight to the interview, or should we actually review the conference that we went? Let's go for the interview with Professor Carsten.
Hi, welcome to Startup Out of the Box with Carsten Maple.
Like
I
Maple
got your name right this time, and we're going to talk about a different. So for the people at home, they know us. We do this podcast about startups, but today it's going to be a bit different because we're going to talk about Carsten, some tips and some useful things for startups. Or what do you think about startups, especially in the security area?
So I guess one of the things to say first of all is that there's tips, but there's challenges, right?
Yeah.
So the best tip is overcome all the challenges, and if you want to overcome the challenges, understand what the challenges are. So startup life in the UK, and you guys will know this, is different to other places around the world. So I remember a government minister asking me a long time ago, not specifically talking about startups, but we had been, but he said, so Carsten, where's our Google, where's our Facebook? I said, well, I'm not convinced we've got the environment for that.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a bit challenging to get that kind of environment. Of course, we have had successful startups. We've had the odd unicorn in the UK, but somebody who can get multi-millions of pounds for their company, be it Sumley or whatever, is doing pretty well. But I think the first thing that somebody needs to do is have more than an idea. So lots of people have an idea, right?
Yeah.
And especially if we don't act on that idea, we think, oh, look at that, somebody's had that idea and I had that idea and I could have made millions and I missed out on it. I've thought this a lot myself, right?
So execution.
So you need to move and you need to act, and there are plenty of ideas that have fallen by the wayside for all sorts of reasons. Just miss the zeitgeist. Somebody's there just before you, or the timing isn't right, and actually you can be too early. Sometimes. But I think the first thing to do is to get some people around you. So get people around you who are going to discuss that idea.
But here in the UK you have a lot of kind of startup groups, right? So you can have even accelerators, you can even have stuff within academia, right, that can support you to have your own ideas and explore that option. Do you have something at your university that supports startups?
So Warwick is involved in some startups and some innovation. It's challenging for universities in a sense, because if we think about professors, that's quite easy in Stanford, for example, or MIT, because there's that culture. We're a little bit more scared.
More conservative in that sense.
So it's not just being conservative, but it's also, there is a fear.
Okay.
Right, so it's a bit more than just being conservative, because we can be adventurous in a sense, but we won't take risks.
Okay.
So if one thinks, if you have an idea, and it's a good idea, there's access to people to discuss it and people who've made businesses before in the US. Here it's more difficult, and I will talk about an accelerator program in a minute that there is in the UK. But somebody's going to have to give up their job for a year, and we get assessed every sort of 7 years. And if we take a year out and it doesn't work, that's a year that we sort of lost, that we didn't
as a professor,
the next paper or something like that. The ecosystem in the US is really strong. So for somebody to give $200,000 to a professor, actually that's not a bad deal, right? Because you're going to get a professor who's pretty decent, going to do some good work, even if it doesn't turn out into a major you'll get something out of it. So actually it's not a bad business model. But in the UK, there isn't quite that access to finance. It's quite challenging, but there are some new cyber accelerator programs. So GCHQ and the National Cybersecurity Centre have done some really good stuff on, I think they're on their third round of accelerators. So they've had 10 companies. The second lot have already been through, and they're giving them some mentorship. And I met one of those companies the other day, and they were doing some really interesting stuff. So there's some opportunity now. There is going to be a new program. I think we're in the IET today. And upstairs at the conference, I think you'll see there's one that stands about a cyber accelerator for academics, an academic cyber accelerator.
Which is I was kind of intriguing for that one.
Yeah, so that's a newish kind of thing. It's aligned with other initiatives and strategies that the UK have got in the general accelerator space, but this one specifically for academics. And I do know some, so some colleagues I've got have got some starts, but the other things as well. I haven't got the energy that you young guys have got, you know what I mean?
Oh, yes, you do, obviously.
We don't want to go sofa surfing, you know what I mean?
No,
We've got mortgage to pay.
I like my own place, my own bed. I want my own room.
Sorry, so you mentioned that Warwick has some kind of accelerator program.
So they're involved in innovation in a number of different ways, so for example, we're just opening next year the National Automotive Innovation Centre. So sometimes we will encourage some startups, and in fact there is in Warwick there's one of Minerva, what it's called, is the largest angel investor group outside of London. That's what I heard. So they're doing some stuff to encourage academics. But we look at innovation in a whole piece, which says that innovation might be to develop a patent, and then what we'll do is we'll license it. Or we'll create innovation and work in partnership where maybe we just get royalty-free use of the technology, but we try and see the whole ecosystem, the whole sort of spectrum of engagement on innovation. But Warwick is very innovative.
So, considering your presence in different accelerators and in Warwick, helping academia with research and innovation, what are the main, let's say, 3 areas that you think that people need to focus more? Well, in your area, in privacy and security, where do you see that more focus should be done for the next couple of years?
So there's a lot of challenges that need to be solved. So if we talk about startups in security, then you mentioned one thing, that there's been a big shift in legislation this year is GDPR across Europe, and that's also been reflected around the world. So I was recently at an event, and the Canadians were talking about how they want to implement something similar. And the US companies, because Europe's a big market, are actually employing GDPR, just thinking, something
sort of. They're not employing full GDPR. Well, they need to.
They have to in Europe, but they're saying we're not just going to do something specific to Europe, we'll do it across. But that is the thing when you said sort of. There are challenges around GDPR and privacy in general, especially in Internet of Things enabled environments, So how do I actually manage properly my privacy requirements? So there's a project out at CMU now on privacy preservation and trying to get some automation. Some work I'm doing with some people down at Southampton around, how can we get agents to sort of infer what we might want to do around privacy. So that's academic work, but that leads into potential services, because I think people are a little concerned about how their data is being used. So there could be a lot of services that help me manage all of that, my interactions around privacy. And that then also comes around to understanding the secure nature of systems. So I guess the 2 things I'm touching on there are privacy in IoT systems, large IoT, because it's so difficult. There aren't the interfaces we normally have. You engage with lots of different devices at any time.
And security has been one of the...
in those, because I'd like to know when I'm walking around, if my data is being used and I'm transferring it, how secure is that?
Don't you think that when it comes to IoT, devices and companies should follow any kind of certification towards security? Because otherwise everyone can implement their own security methods and whatever.
So there are no real, IoT, and I wrote a paper on this. It's freely available actually on the Journal for Cyber Policy, so please go and read it.
We'll put the link.
But the thing is, IoT came out of a number of different areas, didn't it? Because you had a lot of machine-to-machine stuff. You took some RFID kind of innovations. You've got, Mark Weiser's idea of pervasive systems and ubiquitous computing and that. So it came from a number of different areas, and actually the standards can conflict a little. There are some challenges, right? Because if we think about IoT in smart cities, you've got the infrastructure, you've got the vehicles. It's actually quite a challenge, and I've also written with someone from Costain about those challenges of standards. So there isn't, a one-size-fits-all standard says, I'll do that. But there are a number of guidelines. So today we're here at the IoT Security Foundation conference, and they've got a compliance framework and some best practice guides. And really we need to make sure that people are implementing as good a security as they can, but without mandating a specific thing, because you've got to understand that businesses won't do that. It is too challenging. So if you say, I want you to use 256 ECC or something like that, then they're going to say, well, no, I'm not going to do that.
I think one of the main topics that they have been talking about today regarding the IoT devices, the recurrent theme, and advice to people that are investing in IoT, but also manufacturers, is buy devices that can update themselves, because the biggest issues that we have had so far regarding attacks and hacks have been because of devices that they can't update themselves. They're basically, when you buy them, you deploy them, that's it, that's whatever firmware was inside, that's it. So a lot of speakers so far have been talking about, if you're going to release an IoT device, make sure that you can update it in an easy way for the user, stuff like that, because if there's an attack, at least you can fix that bug and the person is safe in that way.
Of course, that's really important, and I think now most IoT devices have got that because they've got ways to call back to the mothership. But I think it's important that they do recognise, and goodness me, it's terrible if they don't, that rather than just sending data back, you need to be updating. But I'm thinking companies would do that not necessarily from a security perspective, but rather from changing the functionality of the device. So you'd be just crazy not to have that, because
well, for me, I'm taking the kind of the consumer view of these devices. So I remember a few years ago, if we just bought any kind of toy, at least in Europe, I think in the UK it seems the same, they had this kind of European certification.
The CE mark.
Exactly. That meant that it was safe to a specific age, or it was safe for kids and stuff like that. Can't we have this kind of stamp for security?
So it's a really good question, and that's been talked about today, and there's been lots of talk about that, and some of the reason about why we can't have that. Okay. So one of the challenges around that is what does that standard mean? What is that trust mark? What's that kite mark mean? So, and it's if I buy a doll, for example, then what I know is there's been a certain set of tests that have happened, right? So, and it may say, it may mean that there's no small bits that a child could choke on.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, the one thing is with security, we have to think, what does that mean? What are we going to assure? And as we've got these dynamic systems, how do we assure? Because I can put a stamp on something, and what am I saying? It's secure. Well, we know that you can't really say something secure, right?
You can say something like, we're going to update, we're going to review security policies for this device every 6 months. It can mean something like that, right?
So something like that happened in the trustee mark.
Okay.
Trust, and then an E at the end, mark for web pages. Got it. came in for some criticism, but did people really understand it, and what does it mean?
Yeah.
You know, so if you say I'm going to update every 6 months, well, what happens if there's a vulnerability the day after it's just been updated?
Yeah.
So that's a challenge. And then how do we guarantee that you see, because with a CE mark, you could test it. You know, you might be able to set fire to something, say, you know, some piece of clothing and say it's resistant to this. But how does that translate? And I'm not saying it's not possible, and I'm not saying there's not work in the area. There's some work going on that's funded by the UK government on cybersecurity of vehicles, and I've talked about that before. But there are challenges that we have to understand.
It's still a long way to go before we can.
Yeah, no, the thing
Just
is,
understand what is that assurance or that badge giving you.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
So
we can start with something, right? Instead of just
Indeed.
spending endless time thinking about the best solution, we can implement something and then iterate afterwards.
It's a really good point. That's hard for academics, right?
No, exactly.
Because we
Because
pick holes in the solutions every time, and then you're right, we end up doing nothing. But yeah, they said don't let perfection be the enemy of good.
Exactly.
You know, so.
I just have one more question from my side. So, and it comes again to startups, and because looking at the market, what I feel is that anyone can have and build their own idea, build a product, and put that on the market, have an application or something, develop their product, develop their startup. But what I feel is that security for them comes at last, just the last thing they do.
Yeah.
And what we see is data leaks, emails, passwords, whatever. Everything is out there. The company is losing a lot of money. I don't feel we're just by the end of 2018, and people didn't feel that they should invest in security up front when they develop their own thing, their own startup. But how can we change this?
So it's a really good point that you're saying. It's a really tough one, and it's about the economics, not just of security, but if we go back ages ago, about the security of testing, the economics of testing, right? Because it costs you, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a moment. But what one should do always is start from a good baseline. And in the UK, the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, DCMS, they've created some guidance that came out just last month, the month before, which was a code of practice for consumer IoT. 13 steps, quite easy. Don't ship with default passwords. You know, these kind of things are things that you can do at the design stage, really easy. Have a vulnerability disclosure statement. Not hard, right? Get these things, and that should be a tick list that's done straight away first. Yeah. Then you've got things about, is it secure, and how do you test? And that's what's challenging, right? And as I said, it's the same for testing, because you can keep testing something, but unless there's something that says, here is the standard test that I have to do for safety, for example, like a car, then you think, well, where do I stop? And security testing is really hard. So there's a question there about, when have I done enough? And the answer should be that you've done enough to make sure that product is safe, because if anything happens, a safety issue happens, and somebody dies, for example, you're going to go to court and someone's going to say, did you do enough? Yeah. And you're going to have to produce evidence and say, look, these are the things I did, and
especially
it's a tragic
in IoT.
thing. Yeah,
especially in IoT. People can die actually if you put that on the car or in the machine or something like that.
Or even medical devices.
Medical devices.
And so I think people need to think about that. Oh my goodness, I could end up in jail. But going beyond that to make sure it's beyond reasonable is a challenge, because so far security isn't something we're willing to pay more for. I don't think. We haven't seen the evidence that someone says, there's 2 widgets, one of them's more secure, this one's 30 quid, that one's 35 quid, and it's more secure. Which do you want? People go, and this is quite obvious why, because they go, I don't understand how that one's more secure. What does it do different for me? Yeah, what's that 5 quid getting me? And you can't relate it to something. So if they can't, the developers can't.
Yeah. The majority of the people will follow convenience, and usually price is the most convenient factor.
It's just the thing that they understand.
Yeah.
They understand that. So if I'm not going to pay more as a consumer, then you as a startup, a developer, you're going to struggle to say, I'm going to spend that money, especially because it'll slow you down as well.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, that's not going to change in the near future, because we can have highly secure environments, but they still have leaks. And people don't understand why they pay more to be more secure. Yeah. and the leaks and the hacks continue.
Because I'm paying more, but I don't know. That doesn't give me. That's definitely secure now.
Yeah.
Well, for example,
So
you had the
it's just a
example.
different problem.
Now the example was a Marriott hotel. So that's a 5-star chain hotel.
Yeah.
People pay a lot of money to stay in that hotel. Well, their data is just public now on the internet. They got hacked since 2014.
Yeah.
And
While
to be
Ibis or Holiday Inn, cheaper chains. So far, nothing happened. So
To be honest with you, I don't think that we need to provide all of that information to hotels to make a reservation, but that's kind of another
That's
point.
something you should look at sometime, right? About identity. There's some work going on in the UK. In the Home Office, I'm doing some work with them as well. But that's about when I want to buy a beer,
Yeah.
I have to typically show my driving license. That's got loads of information on you.
It
don't
does.
need.
Yeah.
So the government in the UK has got the Verify
ID program.
program.
is it still up? I thought that they killed it. Or
No.
It's definitely not killed because I was on it recently, and that's worthy of you doing a podcast on one of your things sometimes. So.
We'll do that. Perfect.
So for startups, the advice would be just look at some default baselines, like frameworks out there, and like some bullet points just to at least
Protect yourself, right?
Yeah, just check
So
the basis.
follow best practice, and those guidelines, they're not hard. Codes of practice and that, they're not saying,
And for most
they're not
frameworks-
mandating the type
Yeah.
of security that you need or anything. They're saying, do good endeavours, you know. So they should do that. Find there's plenty of niches in the market around security and privacy at the minute. Managing authentication to systems, you know. I was advising one company, they got a $35 million A round just last year. You know, there's big opportunity in this area.
Excellent. Cool. Thank you very much.
No
Thank
worries.
you.
Cheers.
We're back. So, what do you thought about the conference itself? If you still remember what happened there.
So the conference was the IoT Foundation conference for 2018.
Yep.
And it was a bit of an overview of what's happening regarding IoT security. So you had different topics from GDPR, what companies need to worry about GDPR, about data, about compliance. But some tracks were about physical security of IoT devices.
Yes.
Others were about frameworks and what's happening policy-wise to ensure the safety of IoT devices.
So it was a lot about awareness. It was about compliance, and obviously IoT and security, and where do we need to put security in this world of connected devices where everything is kind of smart and needs to be secured. We had a different. I must say that some of the presentations, they sounded like, I don't know, 80% sales pitch, 20% something really juicy and useful for us to figure out.
Yep.
They also had a small space when they have kind of company's booth where people could talk about products and can discuss different things there. But for me, what I really probably enjoy most was about the networking side of the event itself, where people could actually talk about this, exchange contacts, and get to know each other.
Yeah, I think the talks were a bit more focused on the executive side, about bringing awareness of what they should worry about in their companies regarding IoT. But there were a lot of attendees that you would say are not at the executive level, the hands-on. So there were some really good insights and some context we got out of there. And talking about cars, actually. It was quite interesting in the IoT that you usually people think about the fridges and stuff like that. There's a lot of conversations about cars.
Cars and connected cars, actually, that was one of the things that we discussed with Professor Carsten. He's a long-time friend, and it's really interesting to have this discussion with him. With the place where we did the interview, if I remember correctly, was the kind of library / coffee shop of the... what was it? The IET something. It was.
No, it wasn't a Farcage. No.
No.
Farcage building. No.
Faraday.
Farcage. Farcage. Yeah, that
Faraday building. But it was really interesting. All of that, and actually to know the building and to know the history of it, and also about the event. But that's pretty much the first topic for today's episode. The second one is security in startups for 2019. So, bottom line, do you think that startups need to worry about security this year, or they should actually start worrying about security?
They should start worrying about security since
the beginning of days. 1994.
Exactly. So security for startups has always been a bit of a sore subject or something forgotten. Eventually, we will get there. Don't worry about it. That's usually the mentality for startups regarding security, and that needs to change. Of course, that doesn't need to be the most perfect product in the world while you're developing it, but once you start developing it, always take in consideration the best practices. Most of the frameworks nowadays, from Ruby on Rails to Flask, Django, most of the common frameworks that people use nowadays have best practices implemented in them. Take advantage of that. Take advantage of the best practices from Amazon Cloud or Google Cloud, stuff like that. They have good best practices, and developers need to take that in consideration from day one.
But don't you think that, for me, security within startups, it's a matter of managing the risk versus compliance, right? Because you need to put your product out there, but you actually need to figure out how you're going to be compliant with, let's say, the data that you're going to gather from that product, but also the risk that you're going to take when you put something out there.
Of course.
But the thing is, when you look at that, and I find this kind of common, it is startups just see this as something to add up and not actually take it seriously. That's kind of my point of view, because obviously they're going to take security measures when it comes to devices and
like
stuff on stuff on the cloud and network and stuff like that. But they're probably not going to look at the code that they're building, and that's probably where the most right now security breaches will occur within startups. It's not going to be on the physical side, on the network, but actually on the code that they're going to produce for their products and stuff like that. That's kind of the overall view of what I have from startups.
Okay, I would say nowadays it's a mix. Most of it, like 50%, let's say, comes from misconfiguration of their infrastructure.
Yeah.
Exposed databases, default passwords, things like that. But also a big part of it comes from, like you said, the applications are not developed properly, and they would allow stuff like cross-site scripting, like SQL injection. So those are things that usually we've been talking about these problems for years and years. The OWASP top 10, it's a top 10 for most common vulnerabilities in web applications. It's basically been the same for years, and every year it's all the same problems appear there.
But also for startups, the thing is that probably either they don't know how to address this, or they think that it's going to be too expensive, right? Because they need to focus probably their money, their investment, rather on pushing the product to the street and to develop and to users. And probably they think that security is going to come last, because after they get the users, then they start worrying about that. And because they think that it is expensive. But the thing is, I don't think that security is expensive. Most of the stuff that you can do, you can hire services from other companies, other startups that can make things secure for you, right?
And the reputation-wise, it will affect you big time if something happens. So, for example, Snapchat in the beginning, when Snapchat got famous in the first year, people figured out that they could access everyone's pictures because the pictures were in an open storage.
Yeah.
Like, that's just a simple configuration check, and no one thought about doing that.
Yeah.
Like, it's something that's quite simple. That's not expensive to do. Just making sure, okay, can people access the directory with the pictures, or yes or no? That's not an expensive feature.
No, it's not. Yeah.
So that's really thought. That's not going into the process.
Don't you think that the whole GDPR thing in Europe is going to help people to the whole awareness of security and to be more careful about the stuff that they're going to do with data? Because actually they're going to be prosecuted, they're going to have fines and stuff like that. So do you think that maybe this year is going to be the year? It's not Linux on desktop, but it's going to be the year of startups thinking more about security and data.
GDPR
is
helping a lot. It's scaring a lot of people more than it should. Some people are taking this like it's the monster. Oh my god, we're all gonna die. We won't be able to create anything else again because of GDPR. But no, you can still create your own startup, your own project. GDPR won't stop you doing that, so it's making people think about what they are doing, how they are doing it, what data they need, how they're going to protect the data. So people are starting to take that in consideration much earlier in the process than before.
Okay. And how do you think that startups, because this is obviously one of the areas of your expertise, how do you think startups what kind of steps do they need to take to actually feel more protected and feel more secure? We also talk about the code, the infrastructure, but where do you think that they should focus first?
That's a good point. I say it's going to depend on each startup, because if you just use like infrastructure as a service, there's not much that you can do. If you have to manage your infrastructure like on top of Amazon or Google, that's your responsibility. At least don't expose everything, just exactly what you need. There are some tools out there that can show you your exposure.
Yeah.
So just look into that, but start with your code and use the best practices.
I think that, and because in the light of GDPR, I think that for any startup, data is going to be a liability. So that's where they probably need to focus their security on first. How to secure user data first. Forget about infrastructure. Infrastructure can be rebuilt, can be redone, you can put anything around there. But if you're going to lose your data, and if you're going to get a fine after that because you lost data, or because someone stole something, or because you're storing data that doesn't belong to you, that's going to be a huge issue for any kind of startup that's going to appear in the market or that's already working there. So for me, the focus should be data, right? So do not leave databases open with default username and passwords. Don't store data on S3 without being encrypted. Focus on that first.
And don't store data that you don't need. Even if you think, we might need this data in 6 months, don't.
No, don't do that.
If you think about that when you get to that problem, don't store data that you don't need.
Right, and probably for the last one, because we discussed the GDPR, one of the functions of that companies need to comply with the GDPR is to have some kind of CISO internally, or someone that could manage the data and stuff like that. Do you think that startups need that kind of function, someone that could look at security and data? Or do you think that, I don't know, let's say for the first year until they have something out there, they don't need anyone to do the security for them?
Well, luckily for startups, the GDPR does bring an exception that if your company is below a certain threshold of employees or size, you don't need to have what would be like a DPO, a data protection officer, or a CISO. You don't need to have that. So they have some exceptions for startups. If you're growing, if you're still like 5 or 6 people, the rules are more lenient. But even so, there should be someone in the company that knows exactly what data the company has, where it's stored, how the data is being used. It's essential that someone in the company knows that, because if someone comes and knocks at the door and asks them, someone needs to know how to answer those questions.
Do you think that security should be an executive thing for the CEO or a technical thing for the CTO to take care of? I'm just asking.
That's a good question.
You don't have an answer?
No, I don't have an answer for that one. Because if you look like in big corporations, usually the CISO, it's not a security. It's a security person, but it's not most of the time a technical person, because it's processes, and most of the time security comes from processes and best practices and guidelines, stuff like that. The technical side is usually just a small part of it. Most of the hacks we see happening come from big companies because they don't have patch management processes. They don't have asset management. That's processes again. People don't know exactly what.
So you're giving me the answer. The answer is going to be executive. It's going to be probably the focus. It's going to be for the CEO, not the CTO, to take care of.
Yeah, the
CTO obviously will take care of security, but that's more kind of operational way and more technical way. The most important one is about compliance, practices, processes, and that probably is going to come from the CEO, someone with the executive power that can actually do things.
Yeah, I have an overview of what's going on. Yeah,
and that's it. So episode 18, the first one for 2019 from our side. It's a lot of different numbers, and see you next week.
And it's a year of Linux on the desktop.
Amazing.
Well, it's running on Windows.
It is.
So you see, there we go. We got it.
Exactly. Cheers. Bye.